Hey guys, what's going on? This is Andrew from the Controller Cast. I am joined today by a very special guest. As you can imagine, probably from my shirt and my guest hat, we were talking about Nebraska football. So I'm talking to the one and only Jacob Jensen today. Jake, how are you doing?
Great. Glad to be on here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, thanks for coming on. So just a little background, me and Jensen. I think we met in maybe ninth or 10th grade, early high school at some point. So I've known Jake for a long time. We were both Husker sports aficionados, you might say. Uh, I'll do a little background about myself with it. I think me and Jake's Husker upbringings are pretty similar. My dad's a huge Nebraska fan. So growing up, I was always, watching football games, going to games, baseball, basketball, all that stuff. So I'm a pretty big fan, and I think Jake, you have a pretty similar situation.
Yeah. When I was actually, it's kind of a funny story. When I was born, the minute that I was given to my mom after my birth, my dad actually ran out of the hospital to the nearest J.C. Penney across the street, and he was so excited about me being born that he bought the first Husker clothing could find. And yeah, so he wanted the first thing I wore to be a Nebraska onesie or shirt for an infant.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, I tell that story, and it just kind of puts like you had mentioned about your dad. Our dads play such a pivotal role in shaping us into who we are with Nebraska and like sports like football, basketball, baseball.
Yeah, I know. Actually, when I was little, one of the first little stuffed animals I had was like a little tiny, like this big. It's like a little plush little red. I got it somewhere, but yeah. So I didn't know that. That's a pretty cool little factoid there for you. So I guess we got pretty similar backgrounds, huge fans. We're always talking about it, so we figured, unfortunately, for better or worse, Nebraska football has been pretty big in the news this past week or so. So I figured it's nothing like a better time. So I guess, first off, I guess, I had always, been going to football games every year. My dad had season tickets for a while. We haven't, obviously, because of COVID last year. They didn't allow fans, and I know Jensen, you guys have season tickets as well for that, and I think you were saying basketball maybe as well.
Yep, we have it for we. My dad's had football since 1970, basketball since I believe 73, and baseball since about 2015, 2016.
Oh
So
man,
yeah,
so yeah, you guys got all of them. Man. Holy cow! Um, yeah, so I mean, I have very fond memories of being a Nebraska fan, as painful as it might be in recent times, especially for men's sports. But we still got baseball, volleyball, wrestling. We got all that stuff. So it's not all awful. I kind of wish football and basketball would pick it up, so then all the sports wouldn't be in such a dismal state. But we'll see. I plan on still going. When they allow fans back in, hopefully this fall. I think I heard. So yeah. So we'll be down there probably. So that's kind of my background. And Jensen. So I guess first off, I figured it might be a little cool thing to do. So I know we have both been Husker fans for 20 plus years. So I figured I would ask you, what is your favorite Husker sports? It can be basketball, football, baseball, any of those. What's your favorite memory stemming from Husker sports?
great question. Probably my fondest memories are with football. I was very, I'm very grateful to have grown up in the very early stages of the Big 12 conference. When I was younger, my dad would take me, my brother, and his friend to all the what we would refer to as the Big Eight road games, which were the closest schools like K State, Manhattan, Ames, Iowa, and Lawrence. And we used to go, and there would be night games in October, and there was nothing more fun than watching Nebraska beat as an example, when we traveled to K-State in 2007, we beat them 56 to 28. And it was a fun era to be a Nebraska fan. We still got to experience a little bit of the Big Eight magic per se that my
Yeah.
father and his grandfather got to experience.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think mine, I know like the latter half of, the ending years of the Big 12, we kind of got back to that spot where, we kind of felt like we were in the national picture all the time again. Something that was kind of missing the first, because I mean, by the time I was like living and had like, kind of like a conscious reality was like, I mean, late 2001. So like, I remember, I think the earliest memory I have is seeing us get the pants beat off us by Colorado in 2001, which isn't a great isn't a great memory. And then we just dabbled in mediocrity until Bo Pelini came. And then um, I think though my favorite memory for sure is in 2012 when we first hosted Wisconsin for the first time after joining the Big Ten, and we had I think a 21-point comeback or something. And it was capped off by, Monte Ball of Wisconsin, dropping that famous fumble in the end zone, or not in the end zone, but, down in their own, inside their own 25. So that was a great memory. I actually skipped homecoming my freshman year to go to that game. And halftime, I was kind of like, yeah, maybe I should have probably gone because this ain't looking so good. But by the end of the game, I was super hype. I was, for better or worse, glad that I skipped homecoming. And I remember coming back to school the next Monday, and everybody was like, "Oh man, homecoming was lit, but you must have had a ton of fun because everybody was checking the scores of the game during homecoming and stuff." And I was like, "Oh man, maybe I did make the right decision." But I think can't think of any other time we beat Wisconsin. So I might have seen that. I might have seen the only victory against Wisconsin since we joined the Big 12 or Big 10 rather. Even though later that year, they whooped on us in the championship game, but I still have that memory. And then I'll pivot over. I'll start with the worst. I think I'll go with mine first because I think we might share the same one. Pretty much everything about the 2009 football season, really. As fun as it was to watch the defense and all that stuff, like dropping that game to Virginia Tech was absolutely brutal to start the year. And then just, you have this defense that is so good, top four, up there with Alabama and Texas, who were both in the national title game that year. And just not being able to have an offense that could carry you. It was a year before, I think 1 year before Taylor Martinez came. I don't remember who the quarterback was. Do you remember?
Oh, I'll be honest. I'm not 100% about that. It could have been. Oh, I'm trying to. It's a good question.
Yeah, I just
I really
remember.
don't know.
Yeah, the offense was not great that year, and Ndamukong Suh got robbed of the Heisman. First of all, I saw a stat the other day. If he was his own team, he would have ranked number 4 in the entire country in total defense, which is insane. Nebraska was at number 1 ahead of Alabama and Texas, who played in the national title game. I mean, you take out that 1-point loss to Virginia Tech, the tragedy at the Big 12 championship. I still think, I that was the first time, and I think really the only time I actually like teared up as a kid watching sports because I was like, man, this just sucks. So close. And then we curb stomped Arizona in the Holiday Bowl that year, but no, I think that year was just missed opportunities. We only lost one game by more than 3 points, I think, and it was who was it? Texas Tech, I think. I think it was Texas Tech, and just the year that could have been. So I'll let you take it away with maybe your worst.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a really rough memory, especially that Texas Big 12 championship game. I was just gonna add real quick with your story about that homecoming game against Wisconsin that you attended. I get asked a lot by people, what is my biggest regret of high school? And surprisingly, what I tell people is that I went to homecoming over that game because because that is the only game since I started going in 2002, the only home game I've ever missed.
Oh
And
man.
I think I've been punished for it enough. It still haunts me to this day. But
Yeah, man.
going with your worst games I can remember, definitely Texas is one of them. But one that really sticks to mind, and the date on this, I believe it was around 2006, 2007. It was in Lawrence. We played Kansas, and they just absolutely tore us to shreds. And it was the first road game that I ever been to in Lawrence.
Oh,
And back then, they were good, and they drew pretty well back then. They had close to sellout crowds, and I just remember it was brutal. Fans were, I was about a 6, 7 year old kid, and fans were taunting me. They were uh, yelling at us, telling us to go back to Lincoln. It was pretty rough.
oh man.
The other worst one I can think of would be Missouri on the road in Columbia. It was a night game about a year ago before that, and that was even worse because fans were even more brutal, yelling at us, um, tantalized, just totally just out of control. I believe one student at Missouri told me to he used some profanity that I can't say on the show, but you can imagine saying profanity to like a 6 year old kid is probably not the best home welcoming. So
Nah.
yeah, no, it's been some rough times in the good.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that Kansas year was that I think that was the year they went to the Orange Bowl and won, I think.
Correct. I believe you are right.
Yeah, 2007, crazy year, crazy year. So we'll pivot over to current day, which is not as exciting as our favorite Husker memories, but all right, just a little quick touch. Volleyball, I think they dropped a game this weekend to Ohio State, but for the most part, they've been doing really good. Baseball, I think, is 5-3, if I'm not mistaken. I think they dropped a one to Purdue, one to Ohio State, one to Iowa so far. So Will Bolt's got those boys working down there. What do you think of no Big Ten championship in Omaha this year?
I'd say that is a real bummer. I know with baseball when we host it, I was at the last baseball Big Ten championship game we had. One of the last baseball games I've attended since COVID, and it was really fun. I mean, we started out early in the tournament, and as the days grew, more and more fans showed up. And by the championship game on Sunday, it was so packed in there. The TD Ameritrade was practically sold out. You had the football team and everything. So
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely a bummer that we can't have tournament in Omaha.
Yeah, a funny story about that tournament. Me and my dad actually went to because the semifinals, I believe we had to play Michigan twice. And we went to the first game of the day, where if we would have won, we wouldn't have to play at night. But yeah, we're standing outside in line to get tickets, and I mean, they got the game playing in the little ticket office in TD Ameritrade, and I'm just watching as I'm hearing everybody in the stands, booing, and I'm like, oh man, what's going on? Look at the screen; it's already 3-0 in the top of the first, and we haven't even got our tickets yet. Michigan's up by 3, haven't even gotten in the stadium yet. We still went in. They made it a game for a while, but I mean that. However, I don't remember how many runs exactly they scored in the first inning, but it was too much of a mountain to climb. But I do remember Nebraska hit a home run. I think it was 2 or 3 run home run, and I mean that place just exploded because everybody had just seen just Michigan stomp all over us all day, and then just to get that little spark going really just sent everybody off. But that's actually the last Nebraska baseball game I've been to just because of COVID last year, and I think their season got shut down actually before they even had a home game, unfortunately. But that's just the world we live in right now, I guess. So
Right.
um
I remember one of the craziest things about that series. My favorite game of that tournament was when we played Iowa. And I'll never forget, they packed that place in there. It was about 50-50 Iowa Nebraska fans. And I believe we just put on a clinic. We beat them, I believe it was 11-1. Total,
yeah, they 10 runned them actually. I
yeah,
think the game
yeah.
ended after the 7th inning because we were up 11-1. Yeah, great memories, great memories. Beating Iowa is always good, no matter what sport it is. Volleyball actually, I believe they're. I don't think Iowa volleyball has ever beat Nebraska. Knock on wood, they have not so far. So,
It'll be
so
interesting. We play them this week, so I don't know. Hopefully, we can beat them.
yeah, I hope so. I hope so too. I think volleyball's got a good shot, especially since I think they're doing most of the tournament in Omaha, if I'm not mistaken, aren't they?
I believe so. I think the NCAA tournament. I don't know if it's in the entire tournament, but I know at least some of it is going to
Yeah.
CHI Health Center.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Get those people vaccinated so we can get some Husker fans in there watching. I know the first volleyball game I ever went to was last year. Me and my girlfriend. Some of my cousins have season tickets for Nebraska volleyball because they live down in Lincoln, and we actually went and watched them play Missouri in the first round of the tournament. And that it was electric. I'd never been to a Nebraska volleyball game before, but man, it was crazy, especially coming the week before we went to a football game. So, just kind of like the two different dynamics there. You got like one team that's hitting their peak, one team that's hitting the absolute rock bottom. And with that, kind of transition into football. So, last year, the year before, and the year before that, Scott Frost era has not gotten off to a very good start in the slightest. So what did you think of Nebraska last year in the 2020 shortened little season we had?
Well, definitely, with record being 3-5, it was very disappointing to see. Uh, One thing I'll mention here was that granted, I know a lot of things didn't go our way, but given the year, I'm kind of more willing to give it a little bit of a put it on the back burner slightly. But there were a lot of glaring issues I saw that replicated over from years 1 and 2 into year 3, uh, particularly penalties. A lot of things such as that are really concerning is offensive production for an offense that's primarily dictated by a spread style that Frost learned and sort of coached and developed over at Oregon. We seem to have a really big lack of offensive production. But the one thing I would say that was a positive note was our defense.
Yeah, yeah, I thought the defense was really good. I think this upcoming year, getting DiCaprio Boodle back, he's coming back, right?
Yeah, I believe so. I believe believe it or not, we returned 9 starters on defense, which is pretty high compared to a lot of schools. So I 100% expect our defense to improve and be better this year than it
Mm-hmm.
was last year.
Yeah, I thought last year was kind of like, I mean, you got to excuse enough of it because of COVID. We didn't get to play Wisconsin's. I genuinely think how we were playing at the start of the season. I think we could have at least given them a pretty good run for their money. I don't know if we would have beat them, but if we could have replicated that first half that we had against Ohio State, I definitely think we could have had a shot. Um, I mean, I don't know. We beat Penn State. Penn State had a really, really bad year. We beat Rutgers and we beat who else did we beat? Who else did we beat last year? I don't even remember who the third team was.
I believe it was. Let me see here. I'll pull it up here.
Because I think, regardless of how the actual season turned out, I think if we would have had the non-conference games, I think we would have at least gotten 2 more wins. Cincinnati would have been really tricky because Cincinnati was balling out last year. They would have beat the brakes off of us. I genuinely think, and I think we dodged a bullet not having to play them last year because I think it would have been rather embarrassing. I think no disrespect to Cincinnati, but you have a coach, Scott Frost, who absolutely bodied Cincinnati when he was down there that one year. So I think rematching against them and them probably bodying us this time would have been pretty indicative of where our program's at and all that stuff. I don't think I think next year coming up, I expect them to get to a bowl. I think if they don't get to a bowl, I think Scott Frost will have a lot of angry fans, and I think he will have a lot of problems on his hand internally on the team. be like coming into year 4, kind of year 3, because last year, I think we can excuse last year for pretty much any coach just because of all how weird and all the circumstances. But I think in 2021, I would expect them to get to a bowl game. If they don't get to a bowl game, I think they got to take a serious look in the mirror at where this program's going. And, we don't have that great of a slate. I mean, our non-conference, I think we have an FCS school, maybe southeastern Louisiana or something of that nature. And then we play Illinois, and we play Oklahoma, who is actually been in the news this week because on Friday, if you're not familiar, a report came out that Nebraska was trying to get out of that game. Actually, Bill Moose came out and said, we're looking to stimulate the local economy. We're having some budgetary issues. We're looking at adding another home game, which would be their 8th home game, which is kind of unprecedented because we usually only get 7 a year. So scheduling 8, you kind of understand it from a monetary perspective. It would bring a lot of money down into Lincoln, just because all the fans being there, spending money at the restaurants and stuff. But at the same time, from a fan perspective, I mean, you don't want to see a team, if your team is serious about, building an identity and being a national competitor, you can't shy away when you get the opportunity to play like a top 5 team, because Oklahoma should be a top 5 team going into the game. They'll most likely be undefeated. I don't know what their schedule looks like, but I would assume it's probably 2 pretty easy games, and then they play us. So what do you think of that whole situation with Nebraska and Oklahoma in their game?
Yeah, it's a very very controversial topic. On one hand, with regard to canceling the game, one of the biggest glaring issues I see with the schedule is that we go from our first home game, which is against Buffalo on
Mm-hmm.
September 11th. That's we only get our next home game after that is all the way into October, and that's not all that great of a situation because it doesn't help Nebraska's recruiting situation. We haven't actually had recruits on campus for over a year, and the problem is that teams like Nebraska's rivals like Wisconsin or Iowa are going to have as many as 3 home games before October. So that's a big advantage to those schools getting recruits in here. Another factor that to be taken into this decision is the athletic budget at Nebraska. So according to what Bill Moose and the University of Nebraska have said, they estimated it's a 40 some million shortfall in the budget this year, and they wanted to get another home game because they value that home game is worth so much money at Nebraska. You've got all the you have 85,000 people, you have everybody buying souvenirs, food, spending money on tickets, tailgating, donors, everything, and it adds up, and it's a lot of money
Mm-hmm.
that's out on. But I will also mention that I believe people underestimate the role that head coaches have in these decisions, particularly in Scott Frost. And I'm not trying to slight Coach Frost in any way, but when I looked at the schedule for 2021, it is pretty glaringly obvious that it it's pretty tough schedule. I mean, you're looking at you open with Ireland, or sorry, you open with Illinois on the road, which Illinois has a new coach, and that's it'd be a very tough game. And you have opponents like Oklahoma, Michigan, uh, Ohio State, Wisconsin, Iowa. Could be very tough games. And then you have your toss-up games like Northwestern, Purdue, Minnesota, Illinois. Uh, you have a very good Buffalo team coming into Lincoln with their star running back. And then
Mm-hmm.
pretty much your most winnable game. And again, saying most winnable game is not always a good thing to say, but you have Southeastern Louisiana late in the year, like you had mentioned.
Yeah, and I think having a very front heavy schedule, it'll either hurt them or help them. I think you have 2 options here. You either lay down, roll over, and just let everybody kick the crap out of you by even Buffalo. I mean, Buffalo is not even a gimme. You'd think I'm sure a lot of fans when the game comes, they'll be like, oh, I've never heard of Buffalo, but I mean, their run game is insane. They have the opportunity to absolutely run all over the defense. And that could be a huge problem. I don't know how Buffalo's defense is for our offense, but I certainly think that the offense needs to improve if they want to have any shot at even coming close to winning any game this year. Because if you put last year's offense in there, I mean, they look like they had no idea what they were doing. There were a couple games where they looked good, but it was mainly because the opposing team was just disorganized. Their defense was porous, all that stuff. And I think depending on how the season works out, I mean, you have to pretty much assume now at this point in our Big Ten tenure that you're going to have at least one guaranteed loss no matter what, because we basically have become permanent crossover division rivals with Ohio State. Unfortunately, the best team and one of the best teams in the nation, much less the Big Ten. So I think looking at next year, they have a lot of room to improve. I think they have legit shot to go to a bowl game, which is really sad to say. Not because Nebraska doing good, but Nebraska's expectation and ceiling almost being 7 wins at this current state. So I kind of want to transition over and talk about the bigger picture with Nebraska. So as most people listening know, the football team is not great. Some people that are listening might not know the basketball team. Surprise, surprise, also not very great. Fred Hoiberg, that team has bright spots, but they also have a lot of bad spots where they just look like you have people that have never touched a basketball in their life sometimes. No disrespect to anybody playing the game, but sometimes a team doesn't exactly look competent, and you don't have to look very much further than the score to realize that they're not that competent. Right now, I think they can get improvements. And I think having this COVID year, just like football, doesn't help at all. So I want to know, me and you have talked a lot in the past about, how this might not be just a football thing. Obviously, it's also a basketball thing. And just kind of seeing how Bill Moose is running the athletic department, especially after the fiasco this week. I thought he handled it very relatively poorly. I think it wasn't the worst thing to say, but I mean, you gotta. It makes Nebraska look like they're tucking their tails and running away from competition, and I don't think that's a good view in a recruit's mind, especially not just fans. It's you go to a school because you want to play big time games against big time teams. You come to a Power 5 conference. Well, why would you pick Nebraska over another Big Ten school? No other Big Ten school is tucking their tails and trying to get out of a top 5 game. So I guess, what is your outlook on the job Bill Moose has done since he's got here? Because from what I can see, he kind of fired. I mean, Mike Riley should have never been hired. I feel bad that he was put in the position he was put in. Because as everybody knows, he was a really nice guy, not that great of a football coach. I think he would have definitely done better if he was like some kind of assistant or talent acquisition coordinator, something like that, like a recruiter or something of that nature instead of a head coach. So really what Bill Moose has done is taken as bad as Mike Riley was, he did have a winning season where we were in the top 10, surprisingly. So I want to know what your views are on him, considering that the two biggest things he's basically done is fired a football coach and fired a pretty good basketball coach who at least got us to around 500 to replace him with a coach who has obviously not gotten anywhere near 500.
Yeah, I think you pretty much hit it on the head. Bill Moose, he when he came into Lincoln, he had a lot of work to do as far as the athletic department goes with hiring coaches. His biggest goal when he essentially was hired in here in Lincoln, he had to get a football coach in here that could turn this program around and essentially turn around the whole athletic department. And I really honestly am very disappointed in how he's handled everything. When you mentioned the Oklahoma game, the reason that infuriates so many people, and by the way, it absolutely does infuriate Nebraska fans. I had
Oh
heard
yeah.
that the university phone lines and the Board of Regents had to shut their phone lines off because Nebraska fans were calling in like crazy, canceling their season tickets, threatening to if they canceled the Oklahoma rivalry game. And, the reason it seems so bad to tuck your tail and run from a series like that is because Oklahoma and Nebraska, essentially, that rivalry is what made Nebraska football what it is. And, football, when it started in Nebraska in 1870, when we had our first team, the reason football took off and is so popular in Nebraska is because Nebraskans are some of the most hardworking people in the country. We work hard and we face adversity right in the face. And when we see our football programs, we want them to be tough, we want them to be resilient, and we want them to, make us proud and represent us well. And a lot of Nebraskans felt that by tucking your tail and running from the Oklahoma game, just because of either shortfalls in revenue or because you want to get to 6 wins, they feel that that is a very non-Nebraska thing to do. It's a very weak move, and it goes against all that we stand for, all our traditions, our foundations, everything.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. I feel that it's bad optics, and it almost makes me wonder. Does he really realize the situation that we have here at Nebraska? With all the traditions and stuff, making sure we get back to a spot where we're competitive and back in the national picture. Because we definitely have not been since he got here. People when he first got here, um, I remember them going, oh, he was at Washington State. He turned them around. Um, and he made some hires. Mike Leach obviously is left now, but he did get Mike Leach up in Washington State and turn them into an actual, put them into a national conversation of sorts. Not necessarily for the playoff or national title, but just a team that people actually knew about and cared about now. And I think, not to slight Washington State, but Nebraska's in a whole different ballpark for the first of all, the revenue. Nebraska being in the Big Ten gets a lot more revenue from their TV deal than Washington State does with the Pac-12 network. They're also tradition. People know Nebraska for football. When they think of Nebraska, they may think of volleyball, they may think of wrestling, depending on what kind of sports that they kind of view throughout their fans' perspective. But with just such a football focused school, it's really hard for an outsider to kind of come in and capture, and fully understand everything that, Nebraska stands for, all their traditions, all that stuff. And I think the other issue is just trying to get Nebraska in the news, not necessarily for the best things. I think he has a very, there's no such thing as bad PR, kind of thing, but there definitely is, especially with colleges, because you're not signing players, you're recruiting players, you're not paying them. Well, not officially paying them, but you're not like an NFL team going out to the free agent market and just signing people. You have to, there is such a thing as bad PR in college football for sure, because you have recruits that are on Twitter, they're on Facebook, they're listening to the news, they're watching Sports Center, all that stuff. And any bad press can, even if it sways one recruit to not even think about your school, for like Nebraska for this instance, it is bad PR. You can't have bad PR when you are the head of a college football program like this.
Right, right. And it's a good that's a very good point about bad PR. I would be very curious to know what the opinion and what the thoughts of the players are, because I had heard, I believe the announcement came out Wednesday, right? Or the news that broke via Stadium,
Mm-hmm.
Brett McMurphy. I know that either on that day or the day before, there was actually a whole reunion of former players from Oklahoma, and Nebraska, and Tom Osborne was at that meeting, and he actually was contacted by the when the original series was scheduled for this 2021-2022 home away cycle. The OU AD actually contacted Osborne about setting it up, and there was that's what led to a lot of excitement. Heck, players I believe on our team were quoted to even saying they are excited for the game, because if you if anybody has any recollection or is a history person with football, they would know that the Nebraska Oklahoma rivalry is it's honestly a great thing for college football. And I fear without it, college football is a little bit darker.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I agree. It's one of those all timers. It's up there with Texas OU, Notre Dame USC. Rivalries like that. They've just defined generations of college football and college sports in general. Because you look at the game of the century coming up, 50th anniversary, and it's just something that's crazy. It's always come up at the right time. The game of the century happened in 71 and Nebraska won the national championship that year. The final year in the Big 12, it ended up being, Nebraska, Oklahoma capping off that conference's, the Big 8, Big 12 era, really, before it
Yeah,
transitioned into what it is today. And I think it's a great rivalry. I wish we were able to play them more, even though they've hit their stride lately, getting in the playoff pretty much every year, almost an auto bid in the Big 12. I mean, they run the Big 12 by and large. So I think it's
yeah,
something to look for in the future. I think Oklahoma is, I respect them. And I hope everybody can just move on from this, even though now they have bulletin board material for this year. But we'll see.
yeah. Like you mentioned, rise to the occasion. So many of those just great classics. Like as an example, like you mentioned, that game of the century, 50th anniversary. In the locker room after the game, they asked Johnny Rodgers what his thoughts on the game was, and he told the press, he goes, "We're gonna win the national title, no doubt." And sure enough, he was 100% right because that same year they beat Alabama 38-6, and their toughest game on the schedule was Oklahoma. A
Hmm.
lot of times you look at the history of the rivalry, whether it be Nebraska winning or Oklahoma winning, it wasn't always the case, but a lot of times, winner of that game would go on to play in the Orange Bowl, win that, and become, the national champion for the year. So it is a rivalry that has defined what Nebraska football is, what it stands for, and what it always should be.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I have fond memories of watching Nebraska and Oklahoma play, even though when I was growing up, it was when they're in the Big 12. So they only played every 2 years, I think. I think they played away home and then took off 2 years, played away home, um, in that nature. So I'll pivot a little over to our last point, which is the future. Kind of what your thoughts are on the future. I'll give mine first. So I think going forward, I think, Scott Frost needs to, kind of find this team's identity. I think they need to figure out if they're going to be perennial, bowl game attendees, or if they're just going to be sitting at home come, Christmas time every single year. And I think we have to see how Bill Moose does in the future. I think he needs to do a better job. I almost wonder if, the way volleyball is going, I wonder if John Cook, um, doesn't retire until Bill Moose is out, because I feel like Bill Moose, based on his track record, unfortunately, he might screw that one up. And if we don't even have volleyball, we still got wrestling, but that can only take you so far, because unfortunately wrestling doesn't have a huge fan base compared to these other sports. So those are my final thoughts. I think they just need to find an identity in the future. The football team mostly, also basketball, they need to figure it out too. And the whole school in general, I think, is, pretty, take out football and basketball. I'd say the athletics are doing pretty well, but unfortunately, football and basketball are the big two revenue makers. So those are the ones that really matter to people in the athletic departments. Like you said, the budget shortfalls all revolve around there, tickets, concessions, all that stuff. So, I think if they do the right things this upcoming year, these next 2 years will be critical for Frost, Hoiberg, and Moose all together. I think we could see that initial hype from 2017, 2018 area, dissolve pretty quickly and leave a sour taste in all the fans' mouths if it doesn't pick up in the next year or two. So I'll let you talk about some future expectations and kind of what your outlook is.
Yeah, in regard to volleyball, absolutely, John Cook. He has this total dynasty with volleyball, and I don't foresee him retiring yet, but I agree with you. I believe he'll stay on a lot longer. Basketball, basketball. Believe it or not, despite all the uh, the last 2 years, all the setbacks. Today we heard that Kobe Webster's coming back. We expect to retain at least some of the guys, so we're going to be able to build a stronger foundation. We have a 5-star. Our first 5-star program history of basketball is coming into Lincoln next year. So look for future prospects. Look for a future uprise in basketball. Uh, Baseball is a little bit unknown with our team yet. Bolt so far seems like he seems to know what he's doing as a pretty good coach. So we'll have to see more with that. Wrestling looks great. I believe Manning, he's been there a long time. He's a
Hmm.
very good coach. They finished, I believe, third in the Big Ten tournament a week or two ago. So that's great to see. That's an uprising
Yeah.
for it. And then, of course, lastly, we have the one that really propels the whole department, the football program. Now, short term, I would like to see Frost get his offensive production going, maybe develop his wide receivers, get a quarterback in there in the future, or perhaps Adrian Martinez in his 4th year will step up and he'll be a real threat next year. If not, eventually we'll have some younger quarterbacks coming in like Logan Smothers, Henrik Harbog from Kearney Catholic, and ultimately in the future, despite what it holds now, I still believe, and I know a lot of people may think this is crazy, but Nebraska has a has an almost just natural born desire to excel at football and just a craving or a never give up attitude towards winning a national title in football. And I genuinely believe, with the bottom of my heart, I believe that someday Nebraska fans are resilient enough and we have enough support, we have enough resources, we have enough overall energy in the program. I believe we can find a way to get this program to where it should be and be a national contender again.
Yep. I wholeheartedly agree. I think someday they'll win the Big Ten. Um, Someday they might even make it into the national championship again. Well, Jake, thank you very much for joining me. I had a blast talking about Huskers with you. So um, everybody listening and watching, make sure you go subscribe to Controller Cast on YouTube, Apple Pod. Give us a good rating, and then yeah. So thanks for listening, everybody. Jake, thank you again.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you for having me on. It was a blast. I
Yeah,
appreciate it.
thanks. All right. Thanks, everybody.